In countries like Britain and France, most of us are not Muslims, and we do not believe in Muhammad as the founder of any faith that we follow. People are Christians, atheists, all sorts of things. You cannot expect, and this is the crucial thing, Muslims should not expect non-Muslims to abide by their own belief system.
Countries like Britain and France are diverse societies where most people are not Muslims and do not adhere to the teachings of Muhammad. This diversity includes Christians, atheists, and people of various other beliefs. A crucial point raised by many is that Muslims should not expect non-Muslims to abide by Islamic belief systems. This tension is central to the controversies stirred by conservative author and commentator Douglas Murray, who has been vocal about his criticisms of Islam's role in the UK and Europe.
One of the interesting things about the difference between Christianity and Islam, by the way, we have an idiot political class in all of our countries that pretends sometimes for the sake just simply of interfaith dialogue, sometimes simply for the sake of fudging along, and sometimes just because they don't know what they're talking about. They pretend that all religions are basically the same. And, you might practice Christianity, I might practice Islam, and he might practice yoga. And it all comes out the same. It's not true.
In recent years, Murray's high-profile interviews and writings have sparked significant debate. He argues that Europe is witnessing the beginnings of a cultural takeover, largely driven by Muslim immigration and the spread of Islamic practices. According to Murray, if these trends continue, the character of European societies will be irrevocably changed for the worse. He points to areas within European cities where police are hesitant to go due to the influence of Islamic radicalism, suggesting that authorities have lost control in these regions. These claims have drawn strong pushback from Muslim community leaders and anti-racism activists who accuse Murray of perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
My guest tonight is a neoconservative writer who's in the country for the Australian Think Inc. event Polarised alongside Dr. Cornel West. His book is The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam.
We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech.
Truth is, the great disappointment of the last 14 years has been that civil society has failed, that we can't do the things to the Islamists that we would do, as I referred to the neo-Nazis.
Please welcome Douglas Murray, everybody. Hello. Welcome, Douglas. Thanks for coming on the show. I know you're very concerned about Western civilization. This show is technically part of the Western canon. Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, the decline in a nutshell.
Well, that's a show. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it very much. I just need to make a disclaimer at the top. Myself and the executive producer of this program, Dan Illich, are involved in your tour with Dr. Cornel West in the country. That was separate to the decision to book you on the show. We haven't been bribed into having a neoconservative on the ABC, but I need to put that out there. If people aren't familiar with your work, what is this strange death of Europe that you refer to?
Well, for many years I've travelled as a reporter, as a journalist across the Third World and Middle East, Africa, many of the war zones of these areas, seen many of the places where people are fleeing from. And in 2015, I was reporting from across my continent, across Europe, when people were coming in unprecedented numbers. We were talking about the German population taking in an additional 2% in a single year alone, where basically the German Chancellor said anyone who makes it to Europe can come. And I saw all of this firsthand, and I realized that there was a catastrophe in the making, a catastrophe which I think has already started to unfurl in the years since. I realized this is just a version of a problem that every country is having to think about. And we're very lucky countries, yours and mine. We're countries that people want to come to. And that isn't an easy thing to deal with, because we know that we cannot take in the world, and yet we can't have the conversation about what we can do. And I thought that we need to think about this much more deeply than we are.
The political consequences of that decision sort of flowing through Germany and affecting Angela Merkel. Some changes seem to be happening. They're trying to get more agreements with North African countries and looking at trying to return some people to where they came from.
They bribed Turkey.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, we already know some of the consequences. German elections saw a party that's generally described as far-right, the AfD, is now the main party of opposition in the German parliament. unbelievable social problems, unbelievable problems with freedom of expression. I mean, another data law just came in at the beginning of this year that tries to stop German citizens saying very critical things about their government on social media. And I just, you know, who could predict any problem?
Murray's critics argue that his rhetoric fuels Islamophobia and empowers anti-immigrant sentiment. They believe his views play into the hands of far-right populist movements that have gained traction across Europe. Ihsan Malik, director of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, describes Murray's language as inflammatory, accusing him of cherry-picking statistics to create an alarmist narrative about Islam's role in Europe. This, according to Malik, has real consequences, fostering a hostile environment for Muslims.
From, for instance, suppressing the rage of the German people. Who could foresee any downside to that, you know?
Not me. All good. Okay. What do you think should happen now to address this situation?
Look, I just, as I say, we have to think about this much more seriously and deeply than we've been thinking about it. A lot of people make a lot of very easy social capital, including a lot of politicians make very easy social capital by basically saying, we're generous, we're open, let them come. They quote John Lennon quite often. And this is cheap and too easy, and it's not up to the task in hand. We have to be able to think about the speed of immigration, the type of immigration we do want, and that means the type of immigration that we just don't need more of. These are really ugly and difficult conversations to have, but it's my belief that if we don't have them, other people will have them, and very bad people will have them. I'm not willing to hand that terrain over. Just not willing to do it.
That ugliness is certainly something we're wrestling with in this country. We always have with immigration in Australia, and now our population has hit 25 million people. Some people are concerned solely by the numbers of immigration that we have, others by the makeup of that immigration. Sure. Some are concerned by both. You talk about how London is a minority white city at the moment. Yeah. It's currently reached that point. In the future, there are predictions that the UK and America will become minority white countries. And I guess when I hear those phrases or those concerns, or when I hear people say phrases like, this part of Sydney doesn't look like how Australia is supposed to look, that makes me feel very nervous. Yeah,
rightly,
it makes me wonder, what are these countries supposed to look like, and who gets to decide that?
Sure. Well, it should be decided by governments which should be accountable to the people. And if the people want such a change to happen, then you can do it. The problem I identify across Europe is that it happens in the face of public hopes and public desire, where the politicians end up berating the public rather than trying to listen to them or trying to answer them. And this, again, is a problem that is just exploding everywhere. Look at Italy is one of the founding members of the EU.
However, Murray's defenders argue that he is simply voicing concerns shared by many Europeans about the rapid demographic changes in their countries. They believe it is possible to critique aspects of Islamic ideology and cultural practices without being labelled as Islamophobic. Conservative commentator James Dingo, for example, asserts that Murray is highlighting legitimate problems arising from mass immigration and the introduction of different values and practices. The debate, they argue, should not be stifled by accusations of bigotry. In his book, The Strange Death of Europe, published in 2017, Murray elaborates on his concerns about unchecked immigration from Muslim-majority countries and the perceived loss of European cultural identity. He warns that these trends pose an existential threat to the continent. Critics have accused him of stoking fears of a Muslim invasion, arguing that his rhetoric is dangerous and divisive.
It's a massively important economy in Europe, and the public there are so angry that they just voted into a government, a party, again, that is generally described as far-right, the League, and a party founded by a comedian, the Five Star Movement, which literally doesn't know what it wants to do. It is a protest vote that has become government, okay? I mean, you can say all sorts of things and make a lot of jokes about Italian politics, but it literally being run by comedians is
sounds fucking awesome, I gotta say.
You should look into this as a career move.
Would anyone vote for me? Well, that was reluctant. What about the way these conversations or the way they affect immigrants who are already here? We could close the borders tomorrow and let nobody in left. Where there is a huge immigrant population in Australia. The phrase, you know, a country built by immigrants is regularly used since the White Australia policy thing, since we wrapped that up.
It depends what you mean by immigrants in Australia. I mean,
sure.
What do you mean when you say that?
immigrants, people who have immigrated post the White Australia policy. I think certainly that's a big part of it, of what we make up the immigrant population. But indeed, yes.
Because it's an important question. I mean, is somebody an immigrant once they become a citizen? I'd say not.
They cease to be an immigrant.
They cease to be an immigrant. Once you're a citizen, you're not an immigrant anymore.
Right.
You're an Australian.
Yeah. Well, there are plenty of citizens, people who are born and raised from, say, the Sudanese community in Australia. There's a lot of focus on that particular immigrant community in Melbourne at the moment.
Because of the home invasion.
There are some issues surrounding the overrepresentation of that community in crime statistics. Yeah. This video went a little bit viral on Vice Australia last week. This is some Sudanese youth recounting some of the feedback and some of the conversation that's happening online at the moment when it comes to their community.
What more do you want? You people in Canberra, this is our country. Please send them back. They don't deserve to be here, and they are used to fighting and destroying other people's businesses, lives, and homes, for God's sake. Can't you see what is happening? We will be taken over by them, and that is for sure. You are a bunch of idiots if you don't see this happening. I say concealed firearms should be considered in Australia. If they're that much of a danger, they should be shot.
In a recent interview with the German newspaper Die Welt, Murray claimed that the mass immigration of Muslims into Europe is the continent's biggest problem. He pointed to rising Muslim populations, the construction of mosques, and the adoption of Islamic cultural practices as evidence of an ongoing Islamization of Europe. Murray reiterated his belief that if these trends continue, European societies will be irrevocably changed for the worse.
I mean, how do we have this conversation without that kind of shit happening?
Well, look, that's just a risk you're going to have to take, isn't it? Because the alternative is you shut everyone up, which isn't going to work. You're not going to be able to tell people don't speak about things, because they may not speak about things, but they'll keep thinking things. And it's much better that you know what they're thinking than that everyone hides it from you. It's going to be a lot better in the long term. But this points exactly to the centre of a conundrum, which is there are specific issues that specific communities bring, undoubtedly. There are specific benefits that the communities bring, undoubtedly, and specific downsides. One thing which I've seen this throughout Europe, if, for instance, people flee a specific war zone, for instance, Somalia, speak to anyone who's fled Somalia in recent years. They have seen things that you can't imagine. Now, it's very likely these people also are going to have a different attitude toward violence as a result. And we have seen this in gangs in London in recent years. A Somali gang moves into an area and they are willing to do things that other gangs won't do, and that causes a rise in violence, gang to gang to gang. Okay. That doesn't mean you don't invite any Somalis. It doesn't mean you don't have any asylum policy. But, you're a damn fool if you're not going to think about that and find some way to address it, because otherwise you leave it to people to start gestating and becoming vile and becoming angry against everybody. So, this is the central stupidity of the assumption of multiculturalists who believe in that not as an idea, but as a policy, that you make things multicultural. The central problem they keep on coming to is this. They think in a diverse society we should hear less views. We should clamp down on views. Look, the more diverse your society, the more views you're going to have to hear. Get used to it. And some of that's going to be really ugly and unpleasant. Well, as I say, what are your alternatives? Because shutting up cannot be one of them.
Well, if you'd like to catch Douglas Murray and hear more of his views, you can catch him at Dr. Corner West in Melbourne tomorrow, Sydney on Wednesday, and in Brisbane on August 19th. Thanks very much for being here. Please thank him, Douglas Murray, everybody.
The concept of no-go zones in major European cities has been a contentious point in Murray's arguments. He claims that areas in cities like London, Paris and Brussels have become dominated by Islamic culture, making them inaccessible to non-Muslims. These statements have drawn significant criticism, with Muslim community leaders and anti-racism activists accusing Murray of spreading misinformation. FMA Badani of the Islamic Council of Europe dismisses the idea of no-go zones as a bogus concept that has been thoroughly debunked. Badani argues that Murray's scaremongering fits his anti-Islam narrative, which misrepresents the reality on the ground. Defenders of Murray maintain that he is raising valid concerns about social tensions and security challenges posed by the growth of insular Muslim enclaves in some European cities. They argue that the political establishment has been too quick to dismiss or downplay these issues. This ongoing debate highlights deep divisions in in how the role of Islam in European society is perceived and discussed, while Murray presents himself as a sober analyst warning about demographic and cultural shifts. His critics see him as a right-wing provocateur, fueling Islamophobia and extremism.
I'm so fed up of the double standards on all of this. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in the last 12 years by Bashar al-Assad and other Muslims in the civil war in Syria. There's no one on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne. There's no one on the streets of London. We have seen hundreds of thousands of people killed in the last decade in Yemen, Muslims being killed. There's no one on the streets of Melbourne. Nobody is standing outside the Sydney Opera House calling gas the Hutu, or gas the Houthi, gas the Shia, gas the... Nobody's marching for the dead Muslims in Yemen. Their co-religionists, we're always told about, care so much about their co-religionists, don't give a damn about their co-religionists. They really don't. Muslims do not love other Muslims. They have no love for them. They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None. If they had any, the Jordanians would have taken in the West Bank Palestinians. The Egyptians would have taken in the territory they used to run, the Gaza, and own the Gaza, and they would have taken in the Palestinians from the Gaza. Why have the Egyptians made sure that not one Palestinian is allowed to leave Gaza? Why do they make sure that their border wall is tough as anything? What do they mind? One thing: Jews living. Jews living and Jews winning. It hits them deep in their soul, in their psyche. It's an ancient, ancient hatred. Perhaps the most ancient among the monotheisms. And the deepest and the ugliest, the nastiest, and the one that has been least addressed. And we've imported it. As we sit here, roughly the same population of Gaza is being forcibly moved by the government of Pakistan. Almost 2 million Muslims are being moved by the Pakistani authorities into Afghanistan. Okay, we have a very large Pakistani community here in the UK. If their country of origin can do that, why can't we? If it comes to that, if it has to come to that. Why does nobody notice this? Why is nobody saying this is an appalling war crime by the Pakistani government? Well, only because there are so many Pakistani politicians and others in the UK and other countries who have a deep connection to their country of origin and would never want to see it looked at in a bad way. They will not criticize that. They haven't said a word about that. So, no, I think that if you are zooming in on Israel, lambasting Israel, and are basically not bothered with everything else in the world, you're not motivated by anything other than being anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. Of course, and it just has to be said. I mean, I've said this so many times that I tire myself with it, but it's necessary to say anti-Semitism is a shapeshifter. It's a shape-shifting virus. It can come from anywhere. At times in the past, it was the case that people didn't like Jews because they were seen to be a different religion and strange and different, and so they were hated for their religion. Then after the wars of religion, you couldn't hate anyone for their religion, so people started to hate the Jews for their race. Then after the Holocaust, you couldn't hate people because of their race anymore, so people hated the Jews because of their nation. On and on.
Murray's stance on immigration and integration is not without controversy. He distinguishes between people fleeing war zones and those fleeing economic deprivation, advocating for a clear line between the two. He warns that failing to make this distinction will erode public sympathy for genuine refugees. Murray also suggests that the best way to cope with serious refugee situations is to keep people close to their home regions, where they can be more easily supported. He highlights the example of Britain being a major donor of international aid within the regions of Syria.
What is one of the greatest moments in Christian scripture, but the moment when Jesus has brought to him the woman who was caught in adultery. And what does Jesus say when the crowd wanted to stone her for her sins? He says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And the crowd go away. Now, in the Islamic tradition, a very, very similar thing happens when a woman is brought to Muhammad and he has her stoned. So, history of Christianity, more bloody or less bloody if Jesus was more like Muhammad? I think everyone would say likely to be more bloody. There are enlightened traditions within certain Muslim traditions, certain ones. They tend, by the way, to be highly prejudiced against by other Muslims. I'm thinking of things like the Ahmadiyya community, certain branches of Sufi Islam, which have very admirable attitudes towards enlightenment and a sort of syncretic belief of their own. But these are minority sects within Islam and are largely hated by other Muslims. Islam is about subjugation to Allah. And that's why one of the reasons why the Muslim world is as it is. The Christian world is as it is because of the legacy of Christianity. I mean, it's from Christianity that we get the idea of rights. Why do I say that? Because even the framers of the European Constitution pretty much knew this. Certainly the framers of the UN Declaration on Human Rights knew this. Certainly the founding fathers of the United States knew this. That the reason why all men are regarded as equal is because all of mankind is created equal by God. And that people may be different in their lives, and we're all different in our lives, and you may be a car mechanic or a king, but that we're all the same. We're all the same in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Creator. Nobody to that extent has the ability to be, is by nature better or worse than anyone else. It's the adventure of their lives to try to be better. But all of these ideas, like the dignity of the individual, these come from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And without them, we would be, like China, or like the Islamic world, or like anywhere else. If we had a different tradition in our past, we would be in a different place now.
Moreover, Murray emphasises the importance of increasing economic productivity in refugee camps, ensuring that displaced people have hope, purpose and work opportunities. He believes that dispersing refugees across various countries is not an effective solution. Instead, he advocates for models that provide support within their regions of origin. The debate over Murray's ideas reflects broader questions about immigration, integration and national identity in Europe. As the continent grapples with these complex issues, the discussion around Murray's rhetoric and the implications of his views is likely to continue. His willingness to engage with diverse viewpoints, including those who support immigration and those who oppose it, has kept his arguments in the public eye.
But this was our tradition. This is our tradition. And anyone who thinks that what I've just described is as water is to fish is making a vast category error.
If I may make this observation, one of the things that has really struck me over the last decade, as there's been a lot of soul searching in the West amongst leading thinkers, is that even people of no belief, I mean, I am plainly Christian in terms of my personal convictions. And one of the reasons, by the way, is that I think justice really matters. I don't think you can have love without justice. It's impossible. So the people who have done these frightful things, I believe they want to be called to account one day. Otherwise, you're saying the lives of the people they've butchered are as nothing. There'll be no justice in this life for them. That's important for me personally, but that wasn't my real point. My real point was that there are a lot of people who don't personally believe, have personally come to the view there's no God or they don't believe in the Christian God, but are able to see intellectually the unbelievable importance of Christianity to what Churchill, I think, as a non-believer, would have called the benefits of civilizational Christianity. And that if we're not careful, if we continue denying that, we'll just be left with nothing, no wellspring, nothing to cling to, just narrow materialism.
This idea that Western civilization is like a cut flower and you can look at it and enjoy it, but it's going to die.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that it isn't a cut flower? And the answer to that is, of course, we find the seeds that planted the flowers and we reseed the land. We replant the flowers, the trees and the bushes of our culture and of our civilization. And that's what we should do. That will be part of the task ahead. And that doesn't mean the dogmatic re-Christianization, although some people might like to go that route, but it does mean a recognition of the wellsprings. And, you know, without that, nothing good can come. Without that, we will simply be a flower that withers and dies.
Murray's controversial statements have prompted a range of reactions, from strong support to vehement opposition. His defenders argue that he is addressing real issues that need to be discussed openly. They contend that dismissing his concerns as Islamophobic silences legitimate debates about the impact of immigration and cultural integration on European societies. On the other hand, Murray's critics warn that his rhetoric exacerbates social divisions and fosters a climate of fear and hostility towards Muslims. They argue that his portrayal of Islam and Muslim communities is one-sided and ignores the contributions of Muslims to European society. Critics also point out that many of the problems Murray attributes to Islamic culture are more accurately related to socio-economic factors and the challenges of integration. The impact of Murray's ideas extends beyond intellectual debates, influencing public opinion and policy discussions. His arguments resonate with those who feel that their cultural identity is under threat and who are concerned about the pace of demographic change. This resonance has political implications, contributing to the rise of populist movements that prioritise national identity and cultural preservation. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.